Good morning, everyone. My name is Courtney Johnson, and I'm joined by Travis Mullinex with the State Auditor's Office, and together we'd like to welcome you to this webinar. We may still have some people getting logged on, but we're going to get started because we have a lot of information to cover today. This training is offered twice each year to the state's high-level officials. That includes everyone from the director positions all the way up to the cabinet secretary level. We understand how important your time is, so we'll try to get through the material as quickly as we can while still addressing any questions or concerns you may have. Over the course of today's session, we will be introducing you to the state purchasing process, as well as explaining the purchasing card rules and procedures. Please type your questions into the chat or question and answer window as you think of them and send them to the host and presenter, and we'll take time at the end of the presentation to go over those. Today's webinar is expected to last until 11 o'clock. With that, let's get started. This training was put into law in 2014 after being introduced as Senate Bill 356 by then-Governor Earl Ray Tomblin. You can see on this slide who is required to participate in the training. Participation in this training is tracked on a fiscal year basis. This training is offered as a webinar each fall and spring. The webinars are also recorded and made available online for on-demand viewing in the state's learning management system, CourseMill. For the current fiscal year, the required recipients of this training will have until June 30th, 2022 to become compliant. For those individuals who choose to view the online recording, CourseMill will send them a certificate of completion upon viewing the entirety of the recording. The course can be found as PUR 400 EFY 22. No other steps are required on behalf of the viewer to receive credit for viewing. This live webinar and its recording have been approved for 2.4 hours of online CLE credit from the West Virginia State Bar. If you are interested in obtaining CLE credits for today's live webinar, please email your name and bar ID number to Samantha Knapp at the email address located on this screen and also within the chat box. Any individual who chooses to view the recording later must self-report their participation in this training to the State Bar following normal self-reporting procedures to obtain CLE credits or contact Samantha requesting to be added to the attendance list for the session. I always like to begin these presentations by introducing you to the Purchasing Division and giving you a brief overview of what we do. Our job is to solicit goods and services exceeding $25,000 on behalf of state spending units, and as part of that process, we try to increase competition among vendors and drive down costs to the state. Our division is managed by Purchasing Director Mike Sheets and broken into 4 sections in addition to our legal counsel. They include the Acquisitions and Contract Administration section, Program Services, the Communication and Training section, and the Business and Technical Services section. The following staff members oversee these various sections and their functions. Assistant Director Frank Whitaker oversees the Acquisitions and Contract Administration section. The buyers in this section are responsible for working with our agency partners to solicit goods and services expected to exceed an agency's delegated authority threshold on behalf of their agencies. There are legislative exemptions, so this only applies to those agencies that fall under our authority. This section also maintains the contract management and agency inspection services programs. Our buyers are assigned by agency rather than commodity, which allows us to be more customer service oriented and build relationships with our individual agencies. This also allows us to focus on being process experts and administrators while giving the agency purchasing staff the role of subject matter expert for the goods or services they need and allowing them to serve as the liaison for the agency's internal procedures. Assistant Director Elizabeth Cooper oversees program services. This section is responsible for several programs administered by the division, including the Surplus Property Program, which manages the state and federal programs for property no longer needed within the respective governments, the Travel Management Office, which offers guidance to state business travelers and oversees statewide contracts for travel-related services, and the Fixed Assets Unit, which maintains the state's inventory of personal property. The Communication and Training section is overseen by Assistant Director Samantha Knapp, and the Business and Technical Services section is overseen by Assistant Director Guy Nisbet. The Communication and Training section is responsible for developing monthly newsletters, maintaining formal publications and documents, including the Purchasing Division Procedures Handbook and Annual Report, distributing guidance to all designated procurement officers through regular e-blasts, maintaining the official procurement officer listing, and much more. They also oversee the Purchasing Division's complete training program, including in-person workshops and virtual webinars, coordinate the annual agency purchasing conference, manage the state procurement certification program, develop online training modules, oversee compliance with training requirements for designated procurement officers, and more. The Business and Technical Services section is responsible for technology as well as administrative functions of the division, including vendor registration, imaging and record retention, bid receipt, and purchase order encumbrance. We also have a general counsel who manages all of our legal affairs, including contract terms and conditions, disputes and resolutions, drafting legislation, and other relevant legal and administrative issues. For the state of West Virginia, the procurement function is centralized within the Purchasing Division. This is similar to how personnel, technology, finance, and retirement are centralized for many states. Having a centralized purchasing division for the state provides many benefits to state agencies and to the state as a whole. Among the benefits, it provides consistency in the application of laws, rules, and procedures. It allows us to take advantage of economies of scale through the use of statewide contracts. It provides system transparency, and it also gives agency procurement officers a central point of contact for process-related questions. There are two primary levels of purchasing. Agencies are granted delegated authority to process their own transactions. The standard delegated authority threshold is $25,000. However, during the 2022 legislative session, House Bill 4499 was passed into law and allows the Purchasing Division to increase this amount based on an agency's inspection score. The threshold can be increased to $50,000 for agencies that obtain an inspection score of 80% to 89.99% and $100,000 for agencies that obtain a score of 90% or greater. The Purchasing Division processes transactions that are above the approved delegated limit for agencies under its authority, while agencies procuring under their delegated authority must follow the current purchasing guidelines, keep a record of all purchases on file, and make those files available for public inspection. Currently, there are no agencies with increased delegated authority. However, several agencies have expressed interest, and the Purchasing Division is currently holding conversations with those agencies to determine the best way to proceed. The Purchasing Division has a dedicated statewide contract buying team who processes and awards statewide contracts for commonly used goods and services. Those include contracts for office supplies, information technology equipment and services, vehicles, sanitary paper supplies, light bulbs, and more. Bidding and awarding statewide contracts usually gets us the best price possible because those contracts are competitively bid and most often single award and based on expected usage. Not only does having these contracts in place save the state money, but it also saves the state agency administrative time because they are not required to bid it themselves. We also buy a wide range of agency-specific commodities and services. For example, we recently awarded contracts for wildflower seed products for the Division of Highways and library audio and visual materials for the Library Commission. While not used frequently, the Purchasing Division does have the authority to participate in cooperative contracts that have been bid and awarded by other public entities. All of our procedures are based on laws and rules established in West Virginia Code and the West Virginia Code of State Rules. Our primary code citation is 5A3, and our rules can be found as Title 148, Series 1 of the Code of State Rules. As noted on this slide, there are also specific code citations for architectural and engineering services, construction, and 2 internal sources, correctional industries, and the state use program. The Code of State Rules requires that each agency head designate a person or people to be responsible for the procurement function for that agency, which must be filed with the purchasing division. The designee listing is updated at the end of each fiscal year for the new fiscal year. The designees are responsible for processing all purchases under their agency's delegated authority and work directly with the agency's purchasing division buyer to process all central acquisitions expected to exceed that amount. They should be involved at all levels of any purchase your agency makes. It is critical that designated procurement officers are trained on the purchasing division's procedures because they serve as the process experts at the agency level, and their knowledge of the state purchasing process can help ensure that your agency remains in compliance with state law. The designee is also required by the Code of State Rules to take 10 hours annually of training offered by the purchasing division, which is tracked on a fiscal year basis. The designated procurement officer listing for those agencies under our authority are listed on our website, and in addition to the annual designation update, agencies are encouraged to send a new designation form anytime changes occur throughout the year to ensure your agency continues to receive important updates from the purchasing division. A copy of that form can be found on our website and emailed to purchasing.training@wv.gov. We can also send a copy of that form to you upon request. To help procurement officers meet the training requirements and to assist them as much as possible in the procurement process, the Purchasing Division maintains a comprehensive training program. We offer multiple platforms for training, including in-person, online via webinars and on-demand training modules, and through an annual conference. The 2020 conference was canceled and the 2021 conference was held virtually. We are excited to get back to our in-person conference this year. Our conference is scheduled to take place from August 24th through 26th at the resort at Glade Springs in Daniels. For individuals who are not yet comfortable attending in-person gatherings, we will also be offering a virtual track at a reduced rate. We also maintain a state certification program. That program is recognized by the Division of Personnel as part of its pay plan policy and incorporates years of public procurement experience, participation in training offered by the Purchasing Division, a hands-on component which involves either coming to the Purchasing Division offices for a 2-day visit or preparing and conducting an internal agency training on purchasing procedures, and successfully completing a final examination. More information on our training program can be found on our website, wvpurchasing.gov, by clicking on the training link on the left-hand side of the page. During fiscal year 2021, the Purchasing Division reported that more than 39,000 new award transactions and delivery orders were processed, exceeding $500 million. This number includes all delivery orders processed against central master agreements, including statewide contracts at both the agency level, which are called agency delivery orders, and through the Purchasing Division, which are called central delivery orders. A central master agreement is a contract processed by the Purchasing Division that covers a specified period of time where all terms, conditions, and prices are confirmed, but quantity is not. Delivery orders are made from these contracts for specific quantities needed. About half of the contracts and delivery orders for fiscal year 2021 were awarded to West Virginia companies. These numbers show the significance of what we do. Because this money comes from our taxpayer dollars, we have a duty to ensure that it is being spent efficiently and ethically. Over the next few slides, I'll go over the purchasing process at a high level, but we'll start with some considerations that should be given prior to preparing specifications or the requisition. Then I'll talk about the different procurement methods we use, our process for advertising solicitations, how we evaluate bids, and more. There are 3 things your agency should be doing to ensure an effective purchasing program. Without having a plan in place to address these three things, it could lead to your agency going without needed services or worse, breaking the law. So these are extremely important to remember and ensure they're being done within your own agency. First, your agency should be tracking all spend. If your agency's purchasing function is centralized, this can be done easily with a spreadsheet. If not, your agency should have an approval process in place to control and track spending and make sure all rules and requirements are being followed. We'll talk about the different spending thresholds on the next slide, but it's important to know how much you are spending for specific goods and services and how much with a specific vendor. Spend is aggregated and tracked on a rolling 12-month basis. You might not think that making a purchase today for a good price at $2,000 would require any sort of bidding, but on the next slide, we'll talk about how that could be misleading. In addition to tracking spend, your agency should also be tracking its contracts. If your agency has a recurring need, it saves your agency time and money to solicit an open-end contract for the good or service. And while it might take more time on the front end to solicit and award a contract, contracts are typically good for 1 year with 3 one-year renewals. That is essentially 4 years of saving your agency time because the contract already exists and money because you know it was competitively bid. Tracking contracts, though, also ensures that your agency doesn't go without a needed good or service upon expiration. And finally, just as important as looking back at spend, it's just as important to look ahead and plan accordingly. Before we get into the purchasing process, it's important to be familiar with the spending thresholds because these will likely dictate things like whether or not specifications will be needed for a transaction, whether a solicitation will need to be advertised, etc. On this screen are the standard delegated authority thresholds. Currently, this is the amount of authority granted to all agencies. I'll talk about the increased threshold shortly. The totals within these thresholds refer to one-time purchase amounts as well as aggregate amounts for the same or similar commodities within a 12-month period. On the last slide, I talked about a one-time purchase of $2,000. On the surface, that purchase appears not to require any bids. But what if your agency had already made a purchase of $6,000 and $3,000 of the same commodity within the 6 months prior? That $9,000 in aggregate, in addition to the $2,000 you expect to spend, would put that purchase over the $10,000 threshold, requiring 3 written bids for that same purchase. Commodities and services that are expected to cost $2,500 or less require no bids. And although no documentation is required in the file, agencies should track these small dollar purchases to ensure they don't cross over into the next spending threshold based on the total aggregate spend. One of the biggest findings our inspectors come across is failure to bid at the delegated level. Purchases of $2,500.01 to $10,000 require 3 verbal bids, and the lowest bid meeting specifications must be awarded the purchase order or contract. The most important thing to remember for this spending threshold is that screenshots from the internet can serve as a bid, so you don't have to pick up the phone and make a phone call. You can go online, do a quick Google search, find the good from 3 different retailers, and award the purchase order to the lowest cost of those 3. Amazon Business Prime can serve as one of the 3 bids required. In 2020, the Purchasing Division entered into a negotiated terms agreement with Amazon Business Prime. Most agencies have created their business accounts, but if your agency did not and would like to, it's not too late. Just contact us at purchasing.division@wv.gov, and we can help you get set up. Next, purchases of $10,000.01 to $25,000 require 3 written bids, and the lowest bid meeting all requirements must be awarded the purchase order or contract. And any purchase expected to exceed $25,000 is considered a central purchase and must be processed through the Purchasing Division. We talked about aggregate spend. If an agency fails to solicit centrally through the Purchasing Division for goods or services exceeding $25,000, they would be in violation of stringing. The Purchasing Division is required to report cases of stringing to the legislature twice a year. On this slide, we'll talk briefly about the increased threshold ranges, which are based on inspection scores. Increased delegated authority is not automatically granted. It must be requested by the agency. Agencies that receive an inspection score of 80% or better may request an increased no-bid threshold up to $5,000. The traditional threshold is $2,500. They can also request an increased verbal bid threshold range of $5,001 to $15,000. The delegated written threshold is where it can get a little tricky. An agency may request an increase up to $50,000 if they have obtained an inspection score of 80% to 89.99%, and up to $100,000 if they received an inspection score of 90% or better. The increased no-bid and verbal bid thresholds apply in these cases would start at $15,001 for both increased amounts. Once your agency has determined a need, there are some things the procurement officer should do before moving on. They need to understand the need. That means knowing what goods or services are available to fulfill the need and what mandatory contracts exist from which the good or service might be available. As long as no mandatory contracts for the good or service already exist, the agency needs to look at the spending thresholds that the purchase will fall within. Knowing the spending threshold will guide the transaction requirements. We maintain a listing of each agency's approved delegated spending thresholds on our Procurement Officer listing webpage. In all cases, it is important for the agency procurement officer to research the need. Research can be the basis for specifications if those are required for the procurement, but it also helps your agency understand the current market and what goods or services are available out there to meet your needs. As part of that research, your agency procurement officer should reference vendor materials or other information publicly available on websites or through publications. They should talk to the individuals within your agency who are familiar with the good or service needed, because they are the subject matter expert in most cases. If they decide to talk to vendors, they should talk to more than one to avoid the appearance of impropriety. For more complex purchases, an agency can engage consultants or issue a request for information. And if the agency has solicited for the good or service in the past, that solicitation and award is always a good starting point to understanding the need and/or determining how things have changed. Once your agency's procurement officer has a better understanding of the need, has determined that the good or service does not exist from a mandatory contract, and has determined that the purchase will exceed the agency's approved written bid spending threshold, they then need to determine the appropriate procurement method for the solicitation. The most used method is the request for quotation, referred to as RFQ. The RFQ is used when agencies know exactly what they need and can draft mandatory specifications to communicate that need. The contract award is given to the lowest bidder meeting all mandatory specifications. If the award is given to any vendor other than the low bid, the agency must document that in the file. For example, a vendor must be disqualified for failing to meet a mandatory specification. The Purchasing Division also has the authority to use two best value procurement methods. Requests for proposals, or RFPs, are used mostly for services exceeding $100,000 when an agency knows what it needs, but doesn't understand the functionality or process needed to get there. An agency must obtain pre-approval from the purchasing director to use that process. The RFP allows the vendor to propose the solution while submitting both a technical and cost proposal, and the award goes to the vendor with the highest combined score. The second best value procurement method the state uses is the expression of interest, or EOI, which is used for architectural and engineering services. The EOI uses a process to determine the most qualified vendor and allows the agency to negotiate the final contract with that vendor, including price. Direct award is the procurement method used when a commodity or service is believed to be available from only one vendor, or when it is believed that no other vendor is willing or able to provide the commodity or service without a detrimental effect to the agency. Regardless of the procurement method used, the law requires that agencies document their attempts to secure competition. When it comes to direct award procurements, agencies should first document their efforts to determine the availability of other sources, and then advertise their intent to make a direct award in the purchasing bulletin for at least 10 business days. That gives vendors the opportunity to come forward if they can provide the good or service. If a vendor expresses interest and provides documentation proving they offer the commodity or service needed, then the purchasing division will require the agency to competitively bid the commodity or service. But if no vendor responds to the advertisement, the purchasing division will proceed with the direct award purchase with the intended vendor. The same goes for direct awards at the agency delegated level, but the procurement officer is responsible for competitively bidding or issuing the direct award. There are other procurement methods besides the ones I've already mentioned, but the last one I'll explain are emergency purchases. These purchases are made when a situation requires a more time-sensitive fix. Earlier, I mentioned that to have a successful procurement program, your agency should properly track contracts. If a contract is set to expire without another one already in place to take over to avoid a lapse in service, that does not constitute an emergency. That is failure to plan. An emergency includes things like flooding to workplace buildings, downed trees, power outages, fires, or anything else that could affect life or property. Emergencies can be declared by the agency head or his or her designee for purchases under the agency's approved delegated authority threshold, while emergency purchases exceeding that threshold require approval of the purchasing director. In all cases, the agency should attempt to get 3 bids, and the files should be properly documented with those attempts or bids. This is as simple as picking up the phone and calling 3 vendors. If an emergency occurs outside of business hours or any other time that the purchasing division is scheduled closed, the agency can proceed with the emergency purchase, but must follow up with the purchasing division on the first business day following the emergency purchase with their justification and all documentation. Once your agency determines the procurement type needed, the procurement officer should work with agency staff to draft complete specifications if the procurement method requires, and it's always important to have at least one other agency person review the specifications prior to submission. Remember that the agency is the expert on the good or service. Recently, the purchasing division introduced a compliance verification checklist for requisition submission. This checklist is required with all requisitions for new solicitations and change orders. The checklist outlines the documentation and information that is required with the requisition and provides the agency with a means of tracking the submission of that information. If required information is missing from the requisition, it must be rejected back to the agency. That creates additional time in the process. Our hope is that this form decreases the chances of that happening and instead expedites the process moving forward. Once the specifications come over to the purchasing division with the requisition, our buyer will review the specifications for things like contradictions, ambiguous terms, etc. However, again, that review should first be completed internally by your staff. The purchasing division also recently created a list of specifications drafting tips for agencies, and we encourage agencies to familiarize themselves with the tips contained on the list. Specifications are often a point of delay, so submitting good specifications up front will help to expedite the process. The specifications serve as the basis for the contract, so they need to be prepared clearly and concisely and in a format that can be easily defended in court if it comes to that. The purchasing division has a specification repository and various specification templates to assist agencies. Those include things like elevator maintenance, HVAC maintenance, security systems, tractors, and more. The Specification Repository can be found by clicking on the Contracts link on the main page of the Purchasing Division's website, and then the Specifications Index button. The templates themselves can be found by clicking on the Forms link from the main page. Everything is shared in a typable format so the agency can customize it to their needs. On this screen is a list of information required with the requisition. They include, but are not limited to, specifications with an attached pricing page, quantity needed, a copy of the most updated terms and conditions completed, the maximum budgeted amount, and a list of suggested vendors. Various pre-approvals and insurance needs may also be required depending on the solicitation type. Agencies are required to include the compliance verification checklist for requisition submission with the requisition. This checklist is a tool that helps the agency know exactly what is required with the requisition, which in turn increases the chances of the requisition proceeding in the process without being returned to the agency. A lot of times, agencies submit requisitions with missing information or with specifications that aren't complete, and that extends the processing time. If the agency is diligent on including this information on the front end, that will help speed things along and give the agency what they need as quickly as possible. This checklist makes that step in the process much simpler. If the contract will replace an existing one, the agency should include a reference to the previous contract. The maximum budgeted amount can be determined through the market research conducted previously. Of course, the agency should include the quantity of the good needed, if known, complete specifications, the type of purchase, such as whether it will require an open-end contract, service dates, or anything else that could affect the contract type, and any agency pre-approvals required, such as those from the Chief Information Officer for information technology purchases, fleet management for vehicles, and others. Agencies are always encouraged to submit at least 3 suggested vendors that can offer the good or service. This can include vendors who have marketed their goods and services to your agency, vendors found online, vendors your agency has worked with before, or vendors found using the vendor by commodity report in WVOASIS's business intelligence. No matter what, this list can be submitted as an attachment or sent in an email. Finally, the agency should include the completed general terms and conditions and any federal funding requirements the agency may have. The terms and conditions should always be pulled off the Purchasing Division's website, along with any forms we maintain. The site will always contain the most current versions of documents. This screen contains some other considerations that should be given when preparing the requisition. For most contracts, the standard term is 1 year, but there are a couple of exceptions to that rule. Those include software maintenance and construction projects. Software maintenance contracts can have an extended initial term of up to 5 years without approval of the Purchasing Division. Construction projects can also exceed 1 year without approval. For all other contracts, extended initial terms should be limited to those with large upfront costs and complex programs or projects, and requests to use an extended initial contract term should be made to the Purchasing Division in writing with adequate justification. In addition to the initial term, the Purchasing Division allows contracts to be renewed for 3 successive 1-year periods, or multiple lesser renewal periods so long as they don't exceed a total of 36 months. Renewals are processed through WVOASIS as a change order and must be approved by the Purchasing Division in advance, and a confirmation signed by both the vendor and the agency requesting the renewal. Renewal documentation should be submitted to the Purchasing Division 30 days prior to the expiration of the contract. Again, if an agency is properly tracking its contracts, this will help expedite the process and ensure there is no lapse in goods or service. There is an expiring contracts report in business intelligence within WVOASIS that agencies can customize to their needs. That report can help the agency know when contracts are set to expire. The Purchasing Division also sends out an expiring contracts report email for central purchases each month, so your agency's designated procurement officer should already be familiar with this report. The Purchasing Division maintains an insurance guide on its website that was developed by the Board of Risk and Insurance Management with an overview of various insurance policies, coverage limits, and more. The agency must select the type of insurance on the terms and conditions, and if they have questions, should direct those to BRIM. One thing to remember is that BRIM has noted that at the very least, the agency should require the vendor to show evidence of commercial general liability and workers' compensation coverage, and in most cases, automobile coverage. Bonds are used mostly in construction contracts, but can be used in other situations. They are meant to protect parties bidding on or receiving certain contracts. The bonds used by the state include bid bonds, labor and materials payment bonds, performance bonds, and maintenance bonds. Our handbook outlines each if you want to learn more about each type. Liquidated damages are another measure used to protect the state. Liquidated damages determine in advance the amount of damages a vendor is obligated to pay for failing to meet one or more contractual requirements. They must be reasonably related to the harm caused to be legally enforceable. And lastly, the agency should consider the shipping and delivery terms. There are two types, FOB destination and FOB origin. These are meant to describe at which point the agency takes control of the goods and who pays for shipping. FOB destination is the preferred shipping method for the state. This puts the responsibility for the cost of shipping and any risk associated with the delivery on the vendor. It also facilitates a better apples-to-apples comparison between vendors' bids. The biggest thing to know about submitting the requisition, besides ensuring that it has all complete information, is knowing which requisition type ends in which award document type within WVOASIS. Most of you on today's call probably aren't responsible for processing solicitations, but this is one of the things that can inevitably hold up a procurement, so it's an important thing to note because it begins with your agency. These types are outlined in Section 3 of our handbook. This slide shares the codes that begin with C, representing central procurement. If this is being done at the agency level, the same flow of information applies, but with an A for agency. CRQS is used for a one-time purchase of goods or services. CRQM should be used for contracts that will be awarded as open-end. Of the contract award types, a CPO indicates a one-time purchase or can be used for construction projects with no renewals. APOs should be used at the agency delegated level. CCTs are used for fixed-price contracts with a defined quantity and renewals. ACTs should be used for these contracts at the agency level. And CMAs should be used for open-end contracts that require a release order by an agency to obtain needed commodities or services. AMAs should be used for open-end contracts at the agency level. Agencies under our authority, as well as the Purchasing Division, use the WVOASIS Vendor Self-Service Portal to advertise all solicitations that require written bids, depending on the agency's approved delegated authority spending threshold, with vendors having access to that information the same day. Vendors can search for current solicitations using keywords or using a variety of other identifiers. As mentioned previously, if a solicitation is assigned an A in front of the document name, that is a solicitation processed at the agency level. Those with a C are central procurements processed by the Purchasing Division. A vendor does not have to be registered to submit a bid, but will need to create an account if that bid is submitted electronically. One of the benefits of creating an account is that a vendor can assign itself commodity codes, which means that they would be notified any time a solicitation is publicized using those commodity codes. All solicitations include a question and answer deadline. We realize that vendors may have questions about a solicitation once it has been publicly advertised, but agency staff are not permitted to talk to vendors once the requisition has been submitted to the Purchasing Division. Keep in mind that pertains to solicitations over the agency's approved delegated authority. The period from the time the requisition is submitted to the Purchasing Division to the award of the contract is known as the blackout period. We often see cases of agency staff failing to comply with the blackout period. When that happens, it could lead to a solicitation being canceled, costing the agency even more time in obtaining the needed good or service. So please make sure your procurement staff understand the need to move all communication through the purchasing division buyer. That is extremely important. The buyer will work with the agency staff to prepare responses, and the complete questions and answers will be issued as an addendum for all vendors. Addenda can also be issued to move back the bid opening date, change or add to the specifications, share pre-bid conference attendee lists, and more. Of course, the blackout period doesn't apply to agency delegated purchases since the designated procurement officer for the agency is in charge of the solicitation and would be responsible for answering any questions. The Purchasing Division conducts all public bid openings Monday through Friday at 1:30 p.m. We encourage agencies to select a different time for their openings to avoid any confusion on the part of the vendors. After the bid openings have occurred, the Purchasing Division posts all bids received electronically or by paper on its website within one business day. It also makes things easier on the agencies because they can go straight to the website to grab the bids and begin their evaluation the same day or the next day. Vendors also have quick access to see which other vendors bid on the same solicitations as themselves. The agency is responsible for evaluating all bids or proposals received, even for procurements exceeding their delegated authority limit. It's important to remember that the purchasing process involves both the Purchasing Division and the agency. To help expedite the process, we have standard timelines that we follow and request that agencies adhere to those standards as much as possible. One of those standards is to submit the recommendation for award to the Purchasing Division buyer within 5 business days of the opening. For more complex solicitations, such as RFPs and EOIs, that deadline is extended to 10 days. The recommendation for award must include the reason for the award and any justification if the vendor being recommended was not the lowest bid. The recommendation for award must also be accompanied by the certification of non-conflict of interest signed by all evaluators and the designated procurement officer for any purchase exceeding the agency's no-bid threshold. After the evaluation is conducted by the agency and the recommendation for award submitted to the Purchasing Division, the Purchasing Division will proceed with issuing the contract or purchase order. For agency-delegated purchases, of course, the agency will issue the contract. But for purchases exceeding the agency's delegated authority, the encumbrance date is the earliest date that work can begin. Encumbering the contract sets aside the funds to ensure money is available to pay the vendor after the goods have been delivered or the services rendered. In most cases, the award date is the same as the encumbrance date and the date the vendor can begin work. But in some instances, a notice to proceed is required for a vendor to begin work. Another consideration that must be given, this one to open in contracts, is that they sometimes require ordering instructions before any work can begin, and agencies must follow the ordering instructions unless an alternate ordering method has been approved by the auditor's office. In some cases, the instructions might require the issuance of a delivery order. Agency delivery orders are typically issued by the agency in amounts less than $250,000, while the Purchasing Division issues central delivery orders on behalf of agencies for goods or services exceeding $250,000. And of course, the agency should be aware of any post-award considerations, including protests received, required post-award meetings or conferences, required reports indicated in the contract, etc. Most vendors conducting business with the state of West Virginia are required to register with the Purchasing Division in accordance with West Virginia Code. If a vendor receives less than $25,000 a year from a spending unit or only provides travel-related services, then they do not have to register with the Purchasing Division. Although vendors do not have to pay the registration fee to submit a bid, they will need to create a user account in WVOASIS if they want to submit a bid electronically. That account is not the same as registering with the Purchasing Division's vendor registration program. Vendors are required to formally register if they receive a purchase order or contract. Vendors are encouraged to complete the registration through the Vendor Self-Service Portal as part of WVOASIS, but may also still complete a paper form through our registration office if technology is an issue. A fee of $125 is required as part of the vendor registration process, and just like registration, there are a couple of exceptions as to who must pay the fee. Those are listed on this screen and can also be found in Section 4.1.2 of the handbook. Vendors must be in good standing with other state and local agencies, such as the Secretary of State's Office, Workers' Compensation, and the Tax Department, to be able to receive a purchase order or contract. The Purchasing Division maintains an impossible to bid list. This list of commodities and services is updated each July and can be found at Section 9 of the Purchasing Division Procedures Handbook. West Virginia Code gives the Purchasing Director the authority to determine which commodities and services are not possible to obtain through the competitive bidding process. Purchasing Division approval is not required for these procurements unless specifically noted. Spending units purchasing from vendors under the impossible to bid list must continue to follow the standard purchasing procedures associated with a normal purchase of the same dollar amount, including vendor registration, and must continue to submit contracts to the Attorney General's office for approval as to form. The Code of State Rules gives vendors the opportunity to challenge the contract specifications written by the agency or the contract award itself. Although from an administrative standpoint, we prefer protests on specifications, we most often receive protests on the back end. Protest of awards must be submitted no later than 5 working days after the award is made, which begins the day the contract is encumbered. The protest of specifications, on the other hand, allows the vendor to protest the specifications prior to bids being opened. Vendors have until 5 working days before the bid opening to submit those protests. The protest of specifications helps the Purchasing Division identify when specifications have been written in a way that restricts competitive bidding or are so ambiguous that the state may pay more because the vendors must account for unknowns. Like specifications, there are several reasons a vendor may protest the contract award. A vendor might protest if the winning vendor bid inferior commodities that are not equal, or if the winning vendor failed to meet a mandatory specification missed by the agency or Purchasing Division during the evaluation process. The thing with competitive purchasing is that our vendors often know their competition better than we do and are happy to point out any shortcomings when they can in hopes that it will swing the award in their direction. When your agency experiences issues with a vendor, the first thing we recommend is to read through the contract and its requirements in their entirety. It's important that the issue ties back to a requirement that the vendor has failed to meet. Once you've done that, the next step is to address the issue with the vendor. The Purchasing Division recently modified its vendor performance form. Formerly, the document was used as a notice from the agency to the Purchasing Division of the issue with the vendor, but oftentimes we found the issue hadn't been properly communicated by the agency. The form will now serve as a tool for the agency to notify the vendor of the issue. Some people dance around a problem because they don't want to hurt feelings or they don't want to make somebody mad, but the fact is that the vendor has an obligation, as does the agency, to make sure they're getting exactly what they paid for. The form ties directly back to the contract clause in which the vendor has failed to perform. In some cases, the vendor might not even realize there's an issue, but before any action can be taken, they must be given the opportunity to make things right. The agency should document all efforts made to resolve the issue, including phone conversations, emails, and letters. When the vendor has failed to perform, the Purchasing Division has also shared with the agencies a template demand letter for use by the agency's general counsel. This is the final step that should be taken by an agency and in most cases corrects the issue. If a vendor refuses to comply, then the agency procurement officer should bring it to the attention of their purchasing division buyer. It's really important to ensure a vendor is performing the requirements as outlined in the contract because there can be serious consequences if they're not. Failure to rectify any issues with the agency can be considered breach of contract. That can lead to things like the state collecting on a performance bond, suspension or debarment of the vendor, or the state collecting liquidated damages, which can sometimes be hefty and burdensome for the vendor. The purchasing division continues to look for ways to make the purchasing process more efficient, and sometimes that includes working closely with our agency purchasers, state administration, and legislators. We're happy to highlight one of the bills that passed during the 2022 legislative session that will have a positive impact on the purchasing process. House Bill 4499, which amended many sections of 5A3, became effective upon passage on March 9th. The changes included the following. The Purchasing Division now has the authority to increase an agency's delegated spending authority up to $100,000 based on its inspection grade. Agencies no longer need to obtain the purchasing affidavit from the vendor. By way of submitting a bid or entering into a contract with the state, the vendor affirms that it does not owe a debt to the state greater than $1,000, no longer requires certain information as part of the vendor registration process, makes purchasing from nonprofit workshops as optional, changes submission requirements for the disclosure of interested parties form. Instead of requiring it with the bid or prior to the contract award, the vendor can now submit it prior to work commencing. This latest legislation will hopefully streamline the contracting process and give agencies more flexibility in the purchasing process. Now that we've discussed the organizational structure of the purchasing division, in addition to the various types of procurement methods, I'll briefly touch on other programs that are administered by the Purchasing Division's Program Services section. The first is the Travel Management Office. The Travel Management Office offers guidance through the state travel policy, which governs state employees who are conducting in-state, out-of-state, and international business travel with the state of West Virginia. This policy addresses the areas of transportation, lodging, meals, registration fees, other expenses, and forms of payment. Fixed assets. Agencies are responsible for certifying their inventory by July 15th of every year, as mentioned previously. The agency head must certify the date of the last fiscal inventory, that all items meeting entry requirements have been entered into the fixed asset system, and that all retired items were retired in accordance with surplus property policy, procedures, and guidelines. A physical inventory must be conducted once every 3 years and requires the agency to physically lay eyes on the property being certified. And the final program is surplus property. The West Virginia State Agency for Surplus Property is responsible for the disposition of commodities or expendable commodities no longer needed by the state. Surplus property must approve all methods of disposition related to the commodities, regardless of the acquisition cost. This slide leaves you with a few helpful resources if you want to learn more about the state purchasing process, including the Procurement Officer listing, the Purchasing Division's website, the Purchasing Division Procedures Handbook, the Vendor Procurement Guide, our intranet site, and our Specification Repository. Please keep in mind that we'll take a few minutes at the end of today's presentation to answer any questions that you may have, so please continue to send those questions to all attendees or send them to us privately. On behalf of the Purchasing Division, I appreciate your attention. We will now prepare the presentation slides for the purchasing card portion of today's training. Thank you.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Travis Molinax, Assistant Director of Operations of the Purchasing Card Division. And man, it is great to be with you. Thank you so much, Courtney, for a job well done. And as she presented for you all, for your listening pleasure, the purchasing presentation. Hopefully you found that really insightful and educating. If you have any questions at all about that particular presentation, the information that was shared, of course, use the chat. And that was something I believe Courtney already expressed to you all to do. And the same goes for this hour of our conversation here as we dig into the purchasing card program here in the state of West Virginia. But before we begin, I would like to take a moment and just wish all of the moms, all the ladies out there that serve in that capacity of a mother to all of us, happy Mother's Day. I hope you find yourself loved and cherished, and certainly this world would be void without you, and we are so thankful for you. So moms, happy Mother's Day. All right, let's get into it here. We are talking about the purchasing card program. And I want to, as I always enjoy to do in our conversations, is talk about some card statistics and utilization. I realize my audience this morning, this kind of stuff is intriguing. It's interesting to kind of see the dollars and cents and how things are going with the program. Now, understand that I'm about to talk about payables. We'll start about procurement, and that's one of the beautiful things about this training that we have twice a year. And to merge these two wonderful concepts together, procurement and payables, and how we can work together is part of the goal of realization. And part of that I would like to begin is just show you some of the dollars and cents. So right now we have about 7,700 P cards statewide. 7,700 P cards statewide. Now this is over the last fiscal year is what I'm referring to. So over the last fiscal year, we have about 192 master accounts. And of that serves about 130 agencies. So obviously you can see they're just doing the math that some of our agencies have more than one master account associated with themselves, depending on their job duties or how they run their program internally. They have broken it up to multiple master accounts as deemed necessary. The next thing, though, I'd like to share with you is the actual transaction amount, which is approximately 500,000, a little bit south of 500,000 total transactions were processed on the P card last fiscal year. Now that is actually down a little bit compared to what our average was prior to COVID. So we're still kind of in that COVID space. We're definitely coming out of it. I would say by and large, everybody's spending has resumed to what it was prior to COVID. So we are seeing an uptrend when it comes to the number of transactions that are processed on the P card. That equated itself to about $953 per transaction. So in other words, for every single card swipe, the average swipe was $953 per transaction. Doing the math, that gives us about a $475 million volume. And if you think about what our overall state budget is for the entire state, we can see where $475 million arrives at that. So compared to all of the other states around the country, all the other 49 states and what they do with their P card program and how much of their state budget utilizes the P card as a payment mechanism, West Virginia is number one. We are the number one program in the entire country when it comes to the utilization of the P card as a payment mechanism in relation to the overall state budget. So we're doing a phenomenal job here in the state program about utilizing the P card to maximize its values. We're doing a really good job with that. But not only with West Virginia do we have the state P card program, but we also have what's called the local government P card program. And so we've been able to implement that program, and that's been in place for a while now across the board. Even though our conversation today is solely about the state program, I did want to at least mention that we have implemented it at the local government level as well. As a result, though, of utilizing the P card, understand it's just not a payment mechanism. I mean, it's just not one of them that's just out there. There's actually some great benefits to this program. And so this next point here that I'm bringing up on your screen, approximately $31.5 million in what we call cost avoidance savings. Cost avoidance savings. In other words, when we use the P card, we're actually saving the state money. It's money that we have to spend to buy the goods or the services that we're paying for, but is there actually a way to save money at the same time you're spending it? And that's what the P card does for us. And let me explain this, okay? So the estimates of the total cost of your traditional procure to pay process, where there's a lot of paperwork involved, a lot of signatures and going to this person for approval, pass to this person, pass to that person, and down the line we go, and eventually a check is being cut. All of that costs the state money. And so the traditional process, the cost of that ranges between $50 to $200. And depending on each state, depending on how much it costs that particular state to actually print a check, if you think about all the security measures that go into a check, all the watermarks, et cetera, that the paper alone costs a lot of money. And many times the cost of having a check printed is going to be more than the actual item that you're paying for. And that's where you see this large number of check payments are made for low value items. And you can see that's very costly. It's costing the state more money to print a check than for the item it's paying for. And so all of this was kind of part, man, we got to do better. And so back in 1996, and at the time, Auditor Glenn Gaynor was at the helm, and him and with his team decided to kind of dig into this. And this is where the Picard program came about for here in the state of West Virginia. And so what we did is that we realized, we did some research with the National Association of Purchasing Card Professionals. They did some research here, and they told us that when you switch from the traditional procure to pay process to where a check is eventually printed and sent out, and you switch directly to a P-card, you instantaneously will save 55 to 80% right off the top. Right off the top. So, for example, if it cost us $100 to print a check, all the paperwork, and the cost that it is to do that, it's going to save us immediately. If we switch instead to a P-card payment, we're going to save $55 to $80 on my example per transaction. Per transaction. On average, though, the NAPCP says, just to throw an average number, they did all their calculations, it's about $63 per transaction that we are saving the state, which is why if I go back in my slide deck, you will see then if you do the calculation of the 499,126 transactions, just south of 500,000 transactions that we put on a P-card, you multiply that number by $63 savings, that $60, that, ladies and gentlemen, is where we get this $31.5 million in cost avoidance savings. Powerful. I mean, that is huge. If we did not have the P-card program, then we as a state would have to figure out a way to come up with $31.5 million extra dollars, because it wasn't like we were paying for more things than we should have. All of these transactions were considered business related. So this was not things that were outside the scope of the business related costs or expenses. This was, or purchases. This was things that were deemed necessary to buy. Instead of using a traditional procure to pay process to secure those items or pay for those goods or services, we used the P-card. It saved the state money per transaction. And man, we saved the state $31.5 million. And then I can be just direct with you. We all know this. As a business, if you're a small business owner, and during COVID, all of us felt that pinch, right? If you're a small business owner and man, it's tough right now, and you got to start cutting costs in order to stay alive, there are things that are going to get cut. And one of those things are jobs. You're going to have to let people go because you cannot afford to pay their salary to work at your business. Well, the state as a whole is kind of the same way. If we don't have the money to pay for things, then eventually things are going to start to get cut. Programs will start to get cut, and maybe even jobs start to get cut. We don't want that to happen. But with the P-card, we actually saved the state $31.5 million, which means that money was able to be allocated to other things like programs, Hatfield and McCoy trails, for example, and I would say even jobs. So when you use the P-card as a payment mechanism, you're actually saving jobs because of the cost avoidance savings that the program directly gives us. That is such a powerful thing. So the question I have to ask then, are we doing our part to ensure that we're saving the state as much money as possible? I mean, you need to really take a look at that. And again, I know we have a lot of people online today, and I don't know what your job is directly internally there. But if you happen to sit into a role, if you're sitting in a chair that you have direct responsibility for how money is spent internally there, the question really is, if a vendor accepts P-card, Visa, as a payment mechanism, then the P card should be the means by which we secure those goods or services. And if you do so, you're going to be saving the state as much money as we possibly can. It's a really great thing. Okay, let's transition. We just talked about how the P card is the payment mechanism. That is the key, but I want to give you a little bit more insight as to why that is. Not only are we saving the state money, but there is an efficiency. Okay, there's an efficiency to it. There's this effective way to decrease expenses that we talk about, but it also gives us increased control and monitoring. Here's the most powerful thing. I mean, truly, if you're just being honest with each other here, one of the most powerful things is when you use the P card as a payment mechanism, I know exactly where that person is, the date stamp, the time stamp, the vendor they were just located at. I know the goods they bought. I know how much of what they bought. I know all of that stuff because, see, when you use the P card, it's an electronic record. And that electronic record cannot be deleted. It cannot go away. We are able to dig in and really capture all of that data. So when it comes to transparency, that is huge. That is huge. When things are done the traditional the payment process, paperwork can sometimes get bogged down and get kind of lost in the shuffle many times. And so, man, trying to do an audit with just paperwork is hard enough as it is. But when you have P card and everything's electronic, it's all there. And man, when you talk about the monitoring and trying to capture fraud, wow, the P card massively gives us the benefits of capturing that kind of information and capturing fraud way before, and a lot easier on the front end versus prior to the utilization of the P card. Let's continue talking about some general information. One of the things about our program back in 1996 that we had to develop policies and procedures. I'm sure you all have that internally. Some policies and procedures, some internal control procedures that tell your people how to run or how to operate internally. Well, the P card's no different. We have the minimum standards established in our policies and procedures. Now, understand that you, though, as an agency, have the freedom to make it more stringent. For example, like we require our cardholders to do training once every 2 years. Well, you could require your people to do it every year if you wanted to. So you can make them more stringent, but your program, internal, the P card program has to at least follow our minimum standards and to likewise develop these internal control procedures. And the idea behind this is this. If auditors come in and audit your P card program, they're going to ask you for this information. Where are your internal controls? What tells us who is supposed to be doing what? Is there supposed to be some approvals, what's the segregated duties? All of that information needs to be clearly designated in your internal control procedures. Okay. And of course, that does need to be turned into our office, being the P card operations office at the state auditor's office. Now, within your internal control procedures, you need to also understand that it is the responsibility of pretty much everybody under the food chain of the P card program being knowledgeable of the policy procedures, the rules, all the applicable purchasing laws and guidelines. This is why we're doing the training today. This is why we partnered with the purchasing division, because you guys need to hear from the procurement side, because that is important. That is very important, massively important, as that comes before the payables. And so it's important to be knowledgeable of all of that information, but not just cardholders and not just the coordinators. Those are the people, by the way, let me just make some definitions. A cardholder is simply a person who has a card, who's charged with that card to buy or to secure goods or to buy goods or pay for services that are state approved. But the individual that's charged with the review of the transactions, to do the oversight, the segregation of the duties, the monitoring, all stuff, those people we simply call coordinators. Now, we realize, though, that within an agency, you might call this person a supervisor. Maybe you call this person a manager, an agency head, a department head. There's a whole bunch of different titles that we call these individuals that serve in the capacity of oversight. So bottom line, if you are a person that is looking at somebody else's P card stuff, you're a coordinator. You're a coordinator. And therefore, as such, you are responsible to also know all of these rules and guidelines that the cardholders have to also know. This is really important. that you also understand that coordinators have to take the appropriate coordinator test. There is a unique test for coordinators that they have to take, as well as the ethics test that everybody has to take. But we'll talk about the testing here in a second. I want to continue to dig in and talk about who is at the top of the food chain internally, and that is the agency head. They're the one that serves as that person. And many times that is the CFO. And they're in charge of the administration, the monitoring their programs. In other words, the CFO cannot kind of just wipe their hands and say, nope, I'm out. I delegated out. No, you cannot delegate that responsibility. That is yours. It's a privilege. It really is a privilege. And for many of our CFOs, man, they are hands-on. They are highly involved in this process. They come to our annual trainings that we provide the coordinators, and that is huge. When leaders like yourself on the line today, are highly involved in everything that goes on internally to include the Picard program. And we are so grateful for those leaders that step up and do that. Get yourself in the trenches, and that goes a long way. Because ultimately you are responsible for the program. If something goes wrong, you're the one that's ultimately accountable for that. One other point I do need to make mention, we do have a lot of people in West Virginia, believe it or not, that like to retire. Yep, when that time comes where they have served the state well, and that time comes where they're ready to retire. And many of those retirees have served in the capacity of a primary coordinator position. Or if a person is in that role and they're moving on to a different job or just maybe leaving the state altogether, anytime there is a change to a primary coordinator position, this is really important. We in the Picard division, we have to be notified of it. We have to be told of this. All of our records says that John Doe is the primary coordinator. Well, all of a sudden we try to reach out to John Doe at an agency and, oh, John Doe is no longer here. I'm sorry, he's not there? No, he left a couple months ago. Oh, well, who is, you see, that can be very awkward and cumbersome in those moments. So anytime there's a change, the CFO needs to send us an email letting us know that there's a change to the primary coordinator position, and John Doe, for my example, is no longer there. It's now Sally Smith. Okay, let us know who those people are. All right, let's keep on moving. You guys are doing great. Really appreciate your attention. Some other additional things I want to bring to your focus here as we talk about just the general information of our program is obviously a person in the coordinator position. They have to be somebody that you trust. Somebody that has demonstrated just excellence in their professionalism and they take it seriously. Somebody who is just, man, a professional to the utmost. And we have lots of them in these roles, and we really appreciate that. The CFO, though, also needs to designate not just a primary coordinator, but what we call a backup person, a co-coordinator, a financial coordinator, somebody that, that knows and understands accounting. The funds, the chart of account elements that your agency utilizes. And the reason why we have to have a backup is because life happens. Life happens. One of my colleagues, I will tell you, one of my colleagues recently has a daughter who's expecting their second child. And then in the last second moment, she had to leave and take care of her daughter. Well, if she's the primary coordinator and now she's gone, but the bill has to be paid, who's going to step up and take care of that internally there? And that's the role of the financial coordinator, that co-coordinator, that person that can step in the gap when the primary coordinator is not there or in partnership with the primary coordinator to ensure that the payment is done and everything flows and functions well within internally there with the program. This last point, though, is really important. We have lots of our great state employees that serve in our boards and commissions, and these are smaller agencies, right? These are agencies that generally have less than 10, maybe even less than 5 employees. And so they wear many hats, as we all do. We wear many hats. So what's important to know, though, is that no cardholder is allowed to be their own coordinator without a written waiver, though, from our office. In other words, a person is not allowed to buy the goods, reconcile the transaction, authorize the payment of that transaction without any oversight. They can't do that without a written waiver from our office, understanding the circumstances at hand, And understand that they have, in these boards and commissions, for example, they have a governing board that they report to. So there is a level of oversight there, but it just happens a little bit differently than your normal situation of agencies that are larger and can do the segregation of duties and oversight, that review process prior to the pay flag being selected. So if that is you today listening, our audience here today, and you are one of those small agencies to where you have by no choice a person that is the coordinator, they are also the cardholder, there is nobody else that can review their transactions to where they're having to check the pay flag, authorize the payment for their own stuff. You need to make sure you have a waiver, a written waiver from our office saying that we're aware of this, we sign off on it, we understand that this is placed and that there's a governing board that actually is oversight in these situations. All of that type of communication needs to be done. If that's you, you need to send us an email. I will provide our email at the very end of our presentation today to give to you so that you would send us an email. Let's get that waiver taken care of so that you're in good compliance with us when it comes to proper oversight. Okay, let's continue on to the next slide. Let's talk about fraud. Let's talk about fraud. Unfortunately, it is a reality of life. Just open up the newspaper. Do we do that still? I don't know. Do you guys still have newspapers? Maybe open up a news article on your computer or electronic device. And the reality is fraud happens. Unfortunately, we have people that want to do things illegally from a financial perspective, and fraud is just a reality. Misappropriation, mismanagement of state funds, we take that seriously, don't we? Because ultimately, that's what it is. We have been entrusted with the taxpayers' money. And as such, we need to be good stewards of that money. We need to care for it properly. It's not just free money for us to spend as we like. There's rules and guidelines for all that. But because fraud does happen and we take it seriously, transparency seriously, should any of that happen internally there to your department, you need to let us know. And the U part is the head of the food chain here, which is the CFO. The CFO has to let us know within 24 hours of their discovery of this fraud situation, this misappropriation or mismanagement with the Picard directly. You can see there in blue on your screen on my slide, that is the email address that we need to know about. The Picard self-report at wvsao.gov. Write that down, make a note of it, pass that along to whom you need to internally there. That is where you guys need to send us anytime you find any instances of fraud, misappropriation, unlawful use. Let us know about it, okay? And real important, internal Picard investigations, by the way, as you can see there on your screen, do not supersede this. This is a requirement. The Picard is the payment mechanism. Fraud was committed on it. The state auditor's office, we are ultimately in charge of the administration of the entire program. Therefore, we have to be notified of these fraud cases. Internal Picard investigations do not supersede this requirement. The fraud, misuse, and abuse when it comes to the code and the rule, as I know all of us are looking for that cutting edge document to read before you go to bed. And man, the West Virginia Code and the legislative rule, those are two great books for you just to open up before you go to sleep. It might put you to sleep actually if you read it, so it might help in those situations. But there they are for your knowledge base and just for your own information. Okay. Let's continue and talk about this Picard self-report team. Now, believe it or not, there's a group of individuals, and our current Auditor McCuskey was the one who really wanted to help the state really focus on capturing instances of fraud and giving you all the ability to freely communicate with us in a way that will help us capture these fraud, misuse, and abuse type stuff. So this is where he came up with and developed the State Auditor's Office Public Integrity and Fraud Unit. And Steve Connolly and Kelly Snyder, those two gentlemen are there and are the recipients, as well as their team of professionals. They are the recipients of all of the email correspondence that is directed toward the Picard self-report email address there. So some other examples besides fraud, which we've already talked about, that you would need to email the Picard self-report would be instances like gift cards without prior approval. Believe it or not, and higher ed is a great example of this. They have business situations that come up where the use of a gift card type payment comes into play. For example, if they're doing a professional survey and one of the things that they're giving is a gift card to those survey takers. They give us all the details of that. For example, we kind of check through it all, make sure everything checks out on our review of submission of this pre-approval gift card purchase. And then we would, if approved, we would give our approval and off they go and they can buy the gift cards for that business need. Another example, for example, would be employee appreciation. As you know, for employee appreciation, this is the opportunity as an agency to say thank you to the employees. And so with partnership with the Ethics Commission to make sure that you follow the ethics rules, a $25 threshold, I believe, is what is allowable per employee per employee. So why not give that employee a $25 gift card? That would be okay if you get prior approval from our office, and obviously you have checked with the Ethics Commission as well. But let's say you went ahead and bought with the P card those gift cards in advance. You did not get the pre-approval. All of a sudden, you violated one of the rules. And now in that situation, you would need to let us know. You need to email Picard self-report acknowledging the fact that you have bought these gift cards without prior approval, and that you are coming forward and letting us know of that. And then the proper steps from the State Auditor's Office Public Integrity and Fraud Unit, they would reach out to you and discuss with you the next steps from there. Personal purchases is another example. We actually had a situation where somebody was on the job and went to a gas station and used their P card to buy gas for their personal vehicle. That's a no-no. Now, remember the P card, if you don't know already, and I'm going to show it on a screen here actually. Oh, there we go. All right, sorry, my volume just kind of got muted there. So here we are on your screen are an example of all of our cards. And you can see there the orange card is criminal orange. Criminal orange. And it is a bright orange card, our P cards. And the reason why we changed the card background is to make it easier for our people to not accidentally use that card for an oopsie. But should that happen to where you have an employee that has utilized the P card accidentally for a personal purchase, that needs to be reported to us at the P card self-report. Well, let's take a look and dive a little deeper here on this slide that's on your screen. We actually have many different card types. Believe it or not, there's actually 8 different card types that are available for our P card program. There's 8 of them. The most widely used one is the state P card, the one card. Now, the state P card, the one card, is not locked down to anything. It is wide open. It can be used. Again, these cards are to be used for all state official business, okay? And it's not locked down to anything. You can use a one card for travel-related purchases, or your regular everyday purchases, or to pay for goods or services. It's not locked down. And it's in the name of the individual that it has been assigned to. But the other most readily used card would be a travel card. Now, the travel card itself is a great card, and it's locked down. Let's just say you have people that are in the field all the time, and they're traveling, doing their work on behalf of your agency. Well, it makes sense for them to have a travel card. All of their purchases are travel related. Gas for their state-issued vehicle, hotel stays for state business. If they're flying airlines, they got an airline flight to come up, that counts as well. How about a registration for a business related conference? That is permitted on a travel card. The travel card is issued in the name of the person, and if they would go, let's just say, and go to Office Max, try to buy a ream of paper, it would get declined. It would get declined because that is not deemed as a travel related purchase. So there's a little bit of a safety blanket there for those type of cards where they're not able to just buy anything they want. It's actually locked down. But there's also another type of travel card, if you will, which is the ghost account, a department travel type of a card. Now, The ghost account is issued in the name of the department, the agency itself. The state auditor's office, for example, we could have a ghost card in our name. Now, there would be a person that would be assigned to the care of that card, but that card would not be given to anybody for them to take then and go travel. That card stays home at headquarters and under the responsibility of that person that is, again, in charge of it. But that person then could book travel related purchases on behalf of the employees. For example, we got the purchasing conference coming up at Glade Springs, I think in August, I believe, of this year. So it's possible, for example, that a ghost card could be used to book the hotel, the Glade Springs, the rooms there for the 10 employees that are going to the purchasing conference. I'm just going to put all of those rooms on this ghost card for reconciliation. You could do that if you wanted to. Or all of your travelers could have the travel card already in their name, and they could use that instead to pay for their individual rooms. A lot of flexibility there when it comes to travel related stuff. Let's move on. We have the emergency P card. Now, the emergency P card is obviously a niche product that we have in place for our departments, our agencies out there that have emergencies, that when a state of emergency is called or instituted, man, they jump in the action there. We had, if you remember, we had the floods that came through. I don't know how many years ago that was when the floods came through up the Elk River. It just, just demolished so many communities and homes, just a tragic situation. State of emergency, right? All of a sudden, all of these emergency cards were activated, and those individuals were able to go right to the problem and do what they needed to do to help our great citizens here and just solve that problem as best they can. And so the limits on those emergency cards are able to be whatever they need to be so that they can go in there and just get the job done. A great product, but that is a unique product based on, obviously, emergency situations. Another one we can talk about is this managed spend card. And you can see on your screen, that's kind of that greenish colored card, that managed spend. Again, a niche product. Where this product is utilized, really, quite honestly, would be our higher ed friends, your athletic teams, where a coach might be assigned this managed spending card. It's going to be preloaded with a certain dollar amount to where the coach is able to utilize those funds for state-related purchases as it relates to their team and buying this, that, and the other. And then eventually it would dwindle down to where there would be nothing left on that card. Just a different type of niche product, just to control a budget type situation where they only have a certain amount of money available as an athletic team, and therefore it helps them stay within that area, those dollars and cents. We have what's called the virtual card, and I've talked about this before. This is a really neat product, and quite honestly, man, I wish we could roll it out to everybody. Unfortunately, we cannot do that due to our current ERP system that we utilize. We can't roll it out due to constraints there. But what it is it's a single-use card. It's a virtual card. It's not a hard plastic card. It's a one-time use card. We actually have one agency that utilizes this product, and it's really successful. And basically, it's this. A vendor is set up, first of all, to accept this one-time use card. You would come to pay for an invoice, and they being the vendor would contact the bank. The bank would then send them this virtual card that they would utilize for this transaction. Once it's used, it disappears. It completely disappears. It was impossible to use that card number again. It's a one-time use card. That's the virtual card platform. This product, one of our departments utilizes it in light of their business needs, and it's off-system payments that we utilize that functionality. Another type of card that U.S. Bank, who is our financial institution, has in their 8 types that we can utilize is a fleet card. For our purposes, of course, we use fleet management. And you obviously, if you have any questions about fleet management that needs to be directed towards fleet management, we would encourage you guys to reach out to them. But that is a fleet card. That is one of the options that U.S. Bank does have in their portfolio. And then the last card, a great new product. You guys are one of the very first groups of individuals to even hear about this product. It's called the Instant Card. The Instant Card. Now, again, this is a niche product. Our friends at DHHR, for example, they had a situation, a business need where they have people out in the field. And they have people out in the field that, in light of their job functions, they are needing to step into the gap there and maybe take a client away from a situation and have to be able to spend money in order to supply their needs. And again, just the niche product GHR and what they do, the Instant Card was developed, and this product enables us to get money to that situation in a safe and protected way in order for them to do their job duties. It's a really neat product. Another one would be like an undercover situation. I know our friends at alcohol, the alcohol board or the alcohol and beverage, I'm getting the name right. Friends there, they had a situation where they had an undercover sting type of deal, to where maybe they needed to get some money there in an instant type situation, and we didn't want to give them a product that had a hard plastic card to it. It actually comes on the phone. It comes up on the phone, and we're able to utilize it there. So really neat product there. They call the Instant Card. Okay, very good. Let's move on very quickly here as we're about halfway done. I really appreciate your focus on this. Transactions. Let's talk about transactions, as they are permitted on the P card, as long as your agency, of course, can provide its documentation for its authority. In other words, if you're going to ask me, hey, Travis, can I buy a gun on my P card? I'm going to tell you, well, one, we are not of authority to tell you what you can or cannot buy. You need to check with purchasing. You need to check with ethics. The reality is, in your agency, the state police, it is definitely within the scope of them that buying a gun is very much appropriate. And therefore, they would be able to use the P card to buy a weapon. Like, that would make sense. Okay. So I'm not going to tell you whether you can or cannot. Our higher ed people, I use this example. Believe it or not, we have people that use the P card to buy lingerie. Lingerie is bought on the P card. Well, you would say, Travis, in the world would we ever use lingerie for a state official business? Well, believe it or not, in higher ed, they have drama departments. And in drama departments, apparently, they have the need to buy lingerie in light of what they do. So we in Picard are never going to tell you what you can or cannot buy. We're going to tell you, do you have the authority for this purchase? Are you following all the laws and rules and regulations, all the purchasing rules? Are you following everything that governs you, including the Ethics Commission? Check with them first. If they say yes, then by all means, use the P card as the payment mechanism. That's the key, which obviously in this collaboration with purchasing is why we say check with the procurement officer, the procurement division, to ensure that the cardholder, him or herself, is completely aware of any relevant encumbered documents, because it's possible that there's already like an award document in play before you make this purchase. And you need to check with them first. There might be an ADL already in play, maybe an APL, maybe a C, like either at the centralized or the AC level, there might be something already there. The cardholder needs to verify that in advance of paying for the item. It is important that the cardholder reviews all of the transactions that come up on their card each and every single month, that they're legitimate for official state business, and either the cardholder or a proxy, somebody that's going into the Oasis financial system, it has to be reconciled every single month by the scheduled payment date. Most of our cardholders are doing their own reconciliation, but we still do have some people that are proxying on behalf of a cardholder. Make sure you understand this, that the system is designed, it is beautifully designed for the user, him or herself, to go into the system and to self-reconcile. Yes, that might require some training. We still have in West Virginia, believe it or not, pockets where internet is not the best. And because of those situations, the cardholder is not able to they don't have an internet connection to do the reconciliation. Well, that makes a lot of sense that then you'd have a proxy to do that on behalf of them. But if they do have internet connection, that's not an issue. Maybe they're just a person that they just don't like technology. We would just always highly recommend just sitting down with them and just maybe train them. Take a moment and help them increase their learning if at all possible. Because when a cardholder is able to reconcile their own stuff, man, that is when you are really maximizing the efficiencies of this Oasis system. Let's keep on talking about supporting documentation here. Supporting documentation is massively important. One of the things that I know when I go home that my wife will talk to me about is receipts. Did you bring the receipt home? You went to the store. Do we have documentation of this? Because we like to keep a budget, right? We want to make sure that everything is the way it needs to be, and just double check that what's on that receipt is actually what we pay for. All of that good proper financial accounting stuff. Well, Picard is no different. And supporting documentation is huge because, again, this is not our money. This is taxpayers' money. And so we need to be accountable to that. And part of that way is supporting documentation. A zero tolerance policy you all should have internally there. Make sure the receipt is there. Packing slips that have signatures when the situation requires that. That is there. Pretty much the idea is if you are an auditor or an auditor comes in and looks at your transaction, is the documentation that's there going to truly support that purchase? And if it is, then you're great. You're great. That's what you need to do. Okay? That's about how you want to go about it. Naturally, we understand that sometimes there can be a delay in that attachment, the attachments getting through. Like, again, if you have a proxy situation and that cardholder is having to mail you the documentation, sometimes that can be delayed. We understand that. The bill has to be paid. So sometimes the transactions have to be reconciled on the front end, paid for on the front end before that attachments get in there. That's not ideal, but it does happen. But the system allows that to happen because afterwards, you can upload that documentation to the transaction. Okay? So the bill has to be paid. That is number one priority. It has to be paid by the scheduled payment date. With or without the attachments there, it has to be paid on time. It cannot be delayed. Picard delegation is prohibited. We talk about this because, believe it or not, it still happens. It still happens. We still have people that, hey, Travis, can I have your card? I need to go buy this. Oh, sure. Here's my card. That's delegation. That's a big no-no. Card, in my example, is in my name. I cannot give my card to somebody else for them to use it. Can't do it. You're not allowed. Nor, by the way, a form of delegation would be if you have somebody else logs in as you and goes to your business-related account that has your P card associated with that business account, and that person is going in and they're buying something logged in as you, utilizing your stuff. Like, no, you can't do that either. Okay. So if any situation, and the most commonly one actually is when you have somebody who is of a lower job title, a lower ranking does not have a card, but the boss does. The boss gives his or her card to that person and say, "Hey, go get this." Like, we see that more often than not. You can't do that. Or vice versa. You have somebody of a lower title that has a P card in their name, and the boss says, "Hey, give me your P card so I can go buy this." Like, you can't do that. Can't do that. That's delegation, and it's completely prohibited. What we would recommend in that situation is just give everybody a P card. Just have everybody have their own P card. That way they can buy the purchases. They can purchase the stuff on their own. Let's transition to program oversight and evaluations. We realize that with the Picard program, the oversight is really important. And we have a division, the Program Oversight and Evaluations group, and they actually partner with you all. This is not an audit group. This is an oversight and an evaluation group. So this group will come in. They will take a look at your internal control procedures. They will see how you're running your program, and they will try to find the holes in it, to be quite honest. They'll review your transactions, details, your accounting procedures, and they will try to find the holes, and they will issue you a report. Now, the purpose of this report is, again, for you to clean up the areas that need cleaned up. Hey, you know what? We found this is an area of weakness that you need to strengthen. Here are our recommendations of how you can strengthen this. Ultimately, it's up to you to take the necessary steps. You've now been made aware of some shortcomings. Now it's up to you to actually take the next steps of filling the holes of that ship that has a hole in it. So this is the idea of this group, a powerful tool right here at your fingertips that we would highly recommend that you guys utilize. Mr. Anthony Woods, Deputy State Auditor here and Director of the Program Oversight and Budget Analysis Group. Give him a call. That was a mouthful of his title. That was a mouthful. There he is. There's his contact information. Anthony's a great guy. Give him a call if you have questions and talk to, hey, Anthony, could you come into our department, come into our agency, and we would love a program evaluation to be done just to see that if we have any shortcomings, and just to partner with us. And he's a great guy. His team, highly professional, and give them a call. Procurement to payables. You know, I never want to have a conversation with my friends here at purchasing without talking about this. Really important. How often does the procurement officer or division actually talk to the payables? How often does that happen? Now, for some of you, you're like, Travis, I wear both of those hats. I am both the procurement officer and the payables person. I do it all here. And man, that is a job load, and I'm sure you do an amazing job at that. And so you get to talk to yourself in that situation. But for those of you who work in an agency to where these are two separate divisions, departments, two separate groups, how often do they communicate? And it's really an important question because understand that in the standard terms and conditions here, when it comes to payment methods, you understand that vendors, they have to pay by an electronic means, whether it's an EFT or Pcard. And so this understanding that vendors have to do this, which means that if they have to accept Pcard as a payment mechanism, which means if there's a procurement document in play, the payable person, the cardholder's person has to know about it. They have to know about it. It's really important that they have to know about it. So it's just simply a payment mechanism, but man, it can really help procurement out. And here is the reason why, is because during reconciliation, you can reference an award document to the Pcard transaction. And upon doing so, when the payment document goes final, which in Pcard, the payment document is called the PRCC document. When that document goes final and it is referencing an ADO, an APO, an ACT, or the centralized of those, it will instantaneously release the encumbrance. Instantaneously release the encumbrance right away. So when you get to the end of the fiscal year, which we are about to cross over into June, and you're going to year end, and you're like, oh my goodness, I have all of these open procurement documents that I actually had already paid for them, but I failed to reference it to my Pcard. Now you got to do a whole bunch of CEC documents just to get this encumbrance correction document to release it. It's a lot more work on the back end. I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, use the Pcard to release the encumbrances by connecting the dots from your award document to your Pcard transaction. A great, powerful tool that you can do. Some final things to bring your attention when it comes to Pcard and Oasis. This is a listing of all of our primary Pcard tables. This table here, the PRCUU, man, first of all, let me just say this. Back in 2014, when we went live with Oasis Financial and we were inundated with all of these acronyms, if you were anything like me, I'm going, what in the world are these acronyms and what do they mean? Well, this is one of them, the PRCUU, which is the one that most of our people go to. This is where all the unreconciled transactions go. But we also have another one. This is where the CUT, it's where the paid ones go. Remember that we talked about just a little bit ago, the documentation, and maybe sometimes you don't have it in time to pay the bill, but you can go to the transactions after the fact to upload that documentation. This is the table you go to, the PRCUT table. That's where you can go to get all the paid transactions, which, by the way, if you have access to see it, you can find all the paid transactions for your entire agency since we went live with Oasis back in 2014. It's all there. The HIER LVL table, this is the table where we have created all of our hierarchy strings. This is the parent table. And what I mean by hierarchy strings, to understand that our card program is built on a 7 hierarchy level system. All of them are built on this hierarchy system. And we had to create these hierarchies somewhere, and that is this parent table, the HIER LVL table is where we created them. All of our coordinators are located on the PRCUHI table. So if you're a coordinator, again, if you're that person that is looking at somebody else's Picard stuff, you're a coordinator, you should be on this table. We should see you here. So if I call up the purchasing division and I said, okay, who are all the people that are looking at Picard transactions? And they gave me a list of 10 people. I should go to the PRCUHI and I should find all 10 of those people there. Likewise, all 10 of those people, I should be able to pull up in the training system and see that they have completed their coordinator training and their ethics training. You see, cardholders, they're listed on this table, the PRCUI table. That's where all the cardholders are listed within Oasis Financial. They have to complete the cardholder test, the ethics test, and then electronically accept the cardholder agreement form, which is basically the contract that they electronically accept, which is them acknowledging that they have read the policies and procedures, that they understand the policies and procedures, and that they agree to follow all the rules and regulations that govern the program. That's what the cardholders are charged with. The coordinators, they have to do the coordinator test and the ethics test. And if by chance you're a coordinator that's also a cardholder, because you're also a cardholder, you also have to electronically sign that cardholder agreement form as well. But those tables are where those individuals should be listed. Some other tables that are what I would call an add to favorites option. These are other tables that we utilize in Oasis Financial in Picard land and that you might just want to favorite. This is the PLOC table. This is where all of our locations are designated, what we call site IDs. It's where this site ID is where all of the cards get delivered to, for example. So we have a lot of card renewals going right now. We've been with U.S. Bank since 2018, so we have a lot of card renewals going on, and these are being delivered to the locations as designated on the PLOC table. We also have the accounting template table, the ACTPL. All of our cards have an accounting template associated with them. This table is where you can find that information. The commodity object code combination, a great tool, because believe it or not, Oasis Financial is a commodity code system. Everything is about commodity code. Why? You might say, Travis, I'm so tired of commodity codes. Why do we have commodity codes? Well, here's the reason why. The reason why we have commodity codes is because we are trying to be as transparent as we possibly can. And so we need to take a moment and tell this system, this commodity, this item that I'm buying, it is office supplies. It is a gas pump. It is whatever it is, because giving it a name helps us to properly be transparent with what we're utilizing state taxpayers' money. The COM-OB is a great table because that, in collaboration with the COM table, is that connection with the object code. The PCCQ table, now the PCC, I've not talked about it till now. The PCC is just simply a document within the system that we utilize for all card applications as well as card maintenances. So if you need the PCC document is what is used if you have a brand new card holder and you need to create a new card for them, the PCC. Or if you have an existing card and you need to do a change, a modification to that existing account, credit limits, single transaction limit, something like that, the PCC is done in that situation as well. Well, the PCCQ is just the query table where you can find some PCC documents that have been completed in the past. This table here is a tongue twister, the PCNFG. This acronym makes no sense to me or you, but that is the acronym in the system. And this is where all of our Picard cycle dates are located. The Picard cycle dates is where we talk about the cycle start date, cycle end date, and then the scheduled payment date. When are the transactions due each cycle? Really, really important information found there. And then the last one is the vendor customer number or the vendor customer table, where all of our vendor customer numbers are located and found. Many of you are already familiar with this table. Here is a screenshot I wanted to give you of our cycle start, end, and scheduled payment dates coming up. We got one here at the end of May 27th, 2022, right around the corner here, which means our cycle end date is going to end on the 16th, which means from the 16th to the 27th, we have 11 days for all Picard transactions that have been posted by the 16th of May, okay, that's the key, bank posted by the 16th of May, all of them have to be fully reconciled by the 27th. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, your cardholders are getting these transactions as they do a swipe and it comes into the system, going to the PRCUU. They can reconcile those things every single day. They don't have to wait till the billing cycle end date to do the reconciliation. They don't have to wait. They can do it the moment it hits the PRCUU. In fact, best practices suggest they do that very thing. They do that very thing. Because year end is what it is, I wanted to give you this on your screen in advance. Year end, June, right here, the scheduled payment date is June 28th. So all transactions need to be done by June 28th when that cycle ends on June 15th. Okay. The last piece of information that I want to give you guys is talking about our reports, the Picard reports. We actually have a whole bunch of them. And I would highly recommend, I know many of you use a lot of the account payable reports, maybe general accounting reports, the general or maybe GL reports. You know, there's a lot of great reports in business intelligence. If you have not navigated, though, to the procurement card reports, I would highly recommend you doing so, okay? And because all of these are Picard specific and will give you some great valuable information. I would give you that the number one report that our people use more than any other is the number 2 report. You can use the warehouse one if you want. There's a little delay in that data, but just the number 2 procurement card activity report, that is the most widely used report. Welcome yourself to that. Check it out. You might really enjoy the information and might help you in your everyday job duties. Okay, as promised, there is our email address. Should you come across any questions, whether today or moving forward, inquiries or anything that you want to get a hold of us, that is our email address, pcardoperations@wvsao.gov. And again, for our listening friends, pcardoperations@wvsao.gov. Please reach out to us. Our team will receive your questions, your comments. We would welcome it. We would be happy to help you any way we can.